If you've clicked on this video, odds are it's for one of three reasons. Either you've watched my content before, you think it's interesting, you don't really know anything about magic, but you're interested in getting into it. You do know magic, maybe, and are unfamiliar with this commander, just getting into it. Or you have been playing for a while and are curious as to what has driven me to this breaking point. So let's talk about Atraxa, okay? As of recording this video right now, Atraxa is the #1 ranked commander, at least on EdRec. Atraxa is a 4/4 Phyrexian Angel Horror. She costs a forest, plains, island, and swamp with flying, vigilance, death touch, and lifelink. And then at the beginning of your end step, you can proliferate, where you choose any number of permanents and/or players and give them each another counter of each kind that they already have. So +1/+1 counters, -1/-1 counters, loyalty counters, stuff like that. I'm not crazy, but there is a little bit of backstory into how we got here. So let's talk about it. If you just want to watch the deck, I'll put a timestamp in the description. You can just skip right there. So a little bit of backstory. The last video I shot was the Temet Eternal Might deck, and I have actually done a lot of work on that deck, and I want to show it off soon. But around the same time I was building that deck, I was building a Lae'zel deck. So Lae'zel is my favorite character from Baldur's Gate. A Githyanki warrior, Vlaakith's champion. If you would put one or more counters on a creature or planeswalker you control, or on yourself, put that many +1 of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead. And then as a background, I picked Master Chef. Commander creatures you own have, this creature enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it, and other creatures you control enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on them. So turn 3 you play Master Chef, turn 4 you play Lae'zel. Lae'zel comes in with a counter, you give her an additional one. And then you play, a creature, gets a counter, gets an additional one. And I was playing this kind of counters deck, okay? Around the same time, I went on a trip with my fiance, and we were pulling Aether Drift packs, and I pulled Ketramos, A New Dawn. So I destroyed my zombie deck, my Eternal Might deck, and turned it into a black and white deck, and I tried to play Ketramos. Now Ketramos on TCG Player is a $50 card. On Card Kingdom it's about $30. So it's a valuable card that I managed to pull. I built this whole Exile deck. I wasn't really feeling it. I wasn't really into it. And I was showing a friend of mine the deck, and he was like, because as soon as I showed him my Lae'zel deck, he was like, Atraxa would fit for this well. And I said, I'm not really that interested in playing Atraxa. I just want to play Lae'zel for now. But I got this Ketramos thing, and I was telling him I didn't really like it. I wasn't really feeling it. And he was like, well, you could just sell Ketramos and buy Atraxa. You'd have way more fun playing Atraxa than you would Ketramos. Nothing wrong with Ketramos, but not my type of play. And I had a light bulb in my head, and I said, yeah, that does sound like a good idea. So I sold Ketramos, and I got this Art of Atraxa. This isn't like the original one. This is like a redo for Commander Masters, I think. But I like this one more. And it was a little bit more valuable, so I got it. And then, so I scrapped my Ketramos deck and returned it into a Hashaton deck. I gutted my Lae'zel deck and turned it into an Atraxa deck. And then from there, it was just taking apart what I had. I took apart a Necrobloom deck, put it in here. I took apart a Myr deck. I can't remember if I, went over that one on the channel or not. But now we have Atraxa. So, why don't we just go through what we got here, okay? So, right off the bat, we got Steel Dromedary. Enters the battlefield, tap with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. And then at the beginning of combat, you can move 1. So you just proliferate him up, and then every combat you can move a counter to Atraxa or another creature you control. And I will say, as we're getting into this, this deck is not, near finished for me. I don't have a lot of the proliferate stuff that you would need. And I'm not running poison. I don't want to run poison counters. I don't want to run infect. I don't want to run toxic. There are a couple cards in here that have poison and infect, just because, it's an ability, it's something I can use. But I'm really trying to go for this +1/+1 counters / Super Friends kind of deck. That being said, we have a Johnny, Adversary of Tyrants. Put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 creatures. Return target creature card with mana value 2 or less from the graveyard to your hand. And then you can also get an emblem with at the beginning of your end step. Create 3 1/1 white cat creature tokens. So you play them, put them up 1, 5, proliferate. First turn you have him out, he's at 6. Pretty good to get an emblem out really early. Lightning Greaves, classic. Hasten Shroud for 2, equip for 0. Tezzeret's Gambit. Draw 2 cards and proliferate. Casual. Boomburrow Swamp. Bossry Ket. Put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature, gains indestructible. Whenever 1 or more non-token creatures attack this turn, create that many 1/1 white soldier creature tokens are tapped and attacking. And you can get an emblem that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 1/1 white soldier and put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So he's cool. Get you some bodies, get you some trump blockers, and at the same time, put some +1/+1 counters on some stuff you control. I think Time Bomb is really funny. During your upkeep, you can put a time counter. During your upkeep, do put a time counter on Time Bomb. Then you can pay 1 and sacrifice it to deal damage to each creature and player, and amount of damage equal to the number of time counters. So you proliferate time counters at the end of every end step. Every turn, you're getting 2 time counters. So if you're playing a longer game or you need some kind of board wipe, you can just stack up time counters on Time Bomb and just blow it up. Last chance resort. Or if you just, I got the game in my bag, you just blow it up. A Johnny Steadfast. Until the end of turn, 1 target creature gets +1/+1 and gains first strike, vigilance, and lifelink. Put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control and a loyalty counter on each other planeswalker you control. And you get an emblem that says, if a source would deal damage to you or a planeswalker you control, prevent all of that but 1 damage. Hunter's Mark. This spell costs 3 less if it targets a blue permanent you control. This spell can't be countered. Target creature you control gets +1/+1 until the end of turn. Then it deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker you don't control. So if I get a big, strong guy, I can have him fight your big, strong guy, because odds are my big, strong guy is going to be bigger and stronger. Unruly Mob. Whenever another creature you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Unruly Mob. This is a useful card in sack outlets. And I kind of use him just in case, I'm playing a lot of the little guys and the little guys die. Or a lot of the time, if I have just these 2 cards out, which has happened a couple times, people will target my Atraxa, and I'll sneak in a little Unruly Mob counter. Path to Exile, classic. Exile target creature. Its controller may search his or her library for a basic land card. So I get to exile you in, you get a little bit of ramp. Keeps the game, flowing. A lot of time, like Swords to Plowshares can be hard because you gain the life equal to that creature's power, but it slows the game down. If I'm destroying your creature, you might as well go get a land. Keep the game moving, So I like Path to Exile. Lenore Sovereign, she actually has her own precon. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature control. Then, if you control 3 more creatures with different powers, draw a card. So, she's a cool little draw outlet. Again, on combat, put a +1/+1 on a creature. Just making sure that, you divvy up if you only have 3 creatures, making sure their their powers stay a little different. But really shouldn't be hard because Laenor starts with 0. Got laid to rest. Whenever a human you control dies, draw a card. Whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, you gain 2 life. So in Lae'zel, I had a lot of humans. So I was able to use both. I have less humans. Laenor is a human. Stuff like that. But whenever a creature with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, I gain 2 life. Just a little bit of something. Not crazy. Just a little bit of something. Strong, the brutish thespian from the Fallout set. 7/7 Ward 2 and Enrage. Whenever he's dealt damage, you get 3 red counters, and you put 3 +1/+1 counters on Strong. And you gain life rather than lose life from radiation. So I can block, get a little bit of chump damage, give myself 3 red counters, give him 3 +1/+1s, and then I can start proliferating those. And get to do that with his ability, obviously. So you can stack up on rad counters and then get a bunch of health and mill out your deck and get what you need. Hypothetically, I thought the rad counter thing was fun. Jiang Yang Wildcrafter. Yangu. Yeah. Each creature with a +1/+1 counter on it has tap to add a mana of any color, and then you can -1 to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So I can proliferate him every turn and to enable to down tick him. And then anything with a +1/+1 counter on it can tap for any mana. Super good for ramp. Oran Reef is cool. It's a forest, but then I can put a +1/+1 counter on each green creature that entered the battlefield this turn. So if I don't have a lot of creatures that come, you have to have the counters to proliferate them. If I just have a green creature, I can play Oran Reef and tap it and get them some counters and get it started. Otho Teferi. When he enters the battlefield, exile another target permanent control, return to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. Then you may activate the loyalty abilities of planeswalkers you control twice each turn rather than only once. So this is a fun one. Get a lot more out of your planeswalkers. But it is a little hard because in these like proliferate style decks, you can only uptick the counters so fast. So if you have some expensive planeswalkers, like we'll see, you might use Otho Teferi and run out of counters before you can proliferate them. Oh, I beg your pardon. Hamza, Guardian of Arashin. The spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. It's pretty easy to get 4 creatures with +1/+1s and pay just a forest and plains for them. Creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. So we can get him up fast. Whenever another creature you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. Good Fortune Unicorn. Another good +1/+1 outlet. You'll notice a lot of these are green and white from when I was running Lae'zel. Cursed Wombat. Nightmare Wombat with Adapt 2. Permanents you control have, whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on this permanent, put an additional counter on it. This ability triggers only once each turn. So, cheap, fun little ramp card. Get you some more +1/+1 counters. Ash Barrens, classic. You can play it for colorless or land cycle it for a basic land. Kaya Orzhov Usurper. You can exile 2 target cards from a single graveyard and gain 2 life. If one creature was exiled this way, at least 1 creature. You can exile target non-land permanent with converted mana cost 1 or less. Or you can deal damage to target player equal to the number of cards that player owns in exile, and you gain that much life. So, this is kind of a meaner card, obviously. You exile a bunch of stuff out of their graveyard or from their playing field and then deal damage to them for how many each one was exiled. Temple of False God is cool. You can tap to add 2 to your mana pool, only if you control 5 or more lands. So, just get a little ramp. Put you a land in for 2 instead of 1. Dreamtide Whale, I just picked this card up. It's got Vanishing 2. Enters with 2 time counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, remove a time counter from it. When the last is removed, sacrifice it. And then whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, proliferate. So this is good. Obviously, with proliferating from Atraxa, you can put more time counters on it, so it never really will leave the field unless your opponent plays something that can remove counters. And then you can have a second proliferate. So, oh, you cast your second spell. I cast my second spell, proliferate. You cast your second spell, proliferate. And then at the end of my end step, Atraxa as well. Good little ramp. Some more old planes. Talisman of Progress. Nothing crazy. This is the Fallout set, so this is like the robot raised by robots. I can't see what the top says. It's too dark. The Surgical Journal from Fallout. Shimmering Grotto. Cool. Cool little man. Falco Spara, Pact Weaver. This guy's cool. Bird Demon, 3/3 with Flying Trample. He enters the battlefield with a shield counter on him. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may cast spells from top of your library, removing a counter from a creature you control, in addition to paying its other costs. So you can play a spell from the top of your library, take a 1/1 counter off of your creature, and play that card. And then I'm just going to add another one anyways. Very cool. Or you can just keep adding shield counters to him and remove those shield counters. This is a cool art. Kaya, Intangible Slayer. Hexproof Planeswalker. Each opponent loses 3 life and you gain 3 life. You may draw 2 cards, then each opponent may scry 1. Exile target creature or enchantment. If it wasn't an aura, create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a 1/1 white spirit creature with flying in addition to other types. So I can basically take your creatures and turn them into my tokens. I think that's pretty cool. Excuse me. A Johnny, Caller of the Pride, classic. Put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature. Target creature gains flying and double trigger until end of turn. And then for 8, create X 2/2 white cat creature tokens, where X is your life total. Because Atraxa has lifelink, you'll see your lifelink. It's pretty easy to gain life, especially when she starts getting stronger. So a Johnny is kind of a fun one. If you get a lot of life, you can just dump him, make 100 cats. Helps catch people off guard. They're so used to expecting you to put a million +1/+1s on something that then you drop a million tokens for fun. Lumberknot. Hexproof. Whenever a creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. This big tree gonna eat this little guy. So this is like Unruly Mob, but better. Instead of being my creatures, it's any creature. Hardened Scales. This is a fun card. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature you control, that many +1/+1/+1 counters are put on it instead. So let's say Lenore puts a +1/+1 on Lumberknot. Put another one. At my step, I'm going to proliferate. I'm going to put +1/+1 on Lumberknot. I'm going to put another one because of Hardened Scales. So in one turn with 3 creatures, I've given one of my creatures +4/+4. Super quick. Now I did mention that there is some Infect. This Plague Mirror. I put him in because he's pretty weak. His Infect, hypothetically speaking, shouldn't become a big deal. And I can tap him for a mana outlet. Just thought he was fun. I definitely can get him big with the +1/+1 counters. Not trying to downplay and act like he's not good. But Infect's not really my prerogative with this deck. Sandstep Citadel, the Secret Lair version. Add a Plains, Swamp, or Forest. Swords to Plowshares. I like the art on this one. Like you literally have the sword and the plowshares, I guess. metaphorically speaking. But yeah, exile target creature's controller gains life. I'm not a big fan of running a lot of removal. This deck probably has more removal than most of my decks do. Vivian Arcbow Ranger. Distribute 2+1/+1 counters among up to 2 target creatures. They gain trample until end of turn. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker. And you may choose a creature card you own from outside of the game, reveal it, and put it into your hand. So this is a really funny one to dip over into my Eldrazi deck and go, okay, I'm going to put this big colorless guy in my hand because I have enough mana to do it. Oops. Selesnya Signet. Cash. Pay 1, add 2. Soul Snare, a little bit more removal. Enchantment, I can pay up planes and sack the Soul Snare and exile target creature that's attacking you or a planeswalker you control. So if you got a big guy, you're trying to buck up against my big guy, I'm just going to sack this and exile it. Blossoming Sands. Angel of Invention. Excuse me. It's got Flying, Vigilance, Lifelink, and Fabricate 2. Other creatures you control get +1/+1. So this is cool. Buff all my other guys, and then at the same time, when he enters, I can choose to put 2 +1/+1s on him, so that we can start getting these counters rolling. And it's got Flying, Vigilance, Lifelink. It's another angel, like Atraxa. Contaminated Landscape, sack for a Plains, Island, or Swamp. Here's a cool one. Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. Draw a card at the beginning of your next end step, untap 2 lands. Put target non-land permanent into its owner's library through from the top. And for 8, you get an emblem with whenever you draw a card, exile target permanent and opponent controls. So this guy's good because not only do you get card draw, you can tap out all of your land, and then on your end step, untap 2 lands for whatever removal instant you need. And you can eventually get an emblem with, I'm going to draw 2 cards per turn. Let's say 1 for my turn, 1 for Teferi. And I'm going to exile 2 of your permanents. Just super broken. Swamp. Forest. Holdout Settlement. Fun one. Tranquil Landscape, like Contaminated Landscape. But this one you sack for a forest, island, or swamp. Renata, Called to the Hunt. Renata's power is equal to your devotion to green. And each other creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1. So now we got creatures entering with several +1/+1s. Give them additional 1 because of hardened scales. So it's just like even your weakest guys, even my 1/1 Mer is entering as like a 5/5 now. Samwise Gamgee art. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, create a food token. You sacrifice 3 foods and return target historic card from your graveyard to your hand. This card's really not that good for this deck, but it fit the colors, and I just love the art on it. So, I did it. I got it. Myriad Landscape. You can pay 2 and sack it to search for 2 basic lands. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm yawning so much, folks. Crush Contraband. Exile artifact or enchantment. This is from the Fallout set. Cool little power armor. Jungle Hollow. Tap for a swamp or a forest. Caves of Koilos. Tap for a plains or a swamp. Now here's my Mer convert. My other toxic. The other Mer has Infect. This one has Toxic. Infect being a little bit better. But this one also I'm using as a mana. You can tap and pay 2 life to get mana of any color. So a little bit of a threat. If you want to just use them for mana, you can. But if you want to use them to attack, you should. Island. Luminarch Aspirant. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature control. So I'm just going to keep funneling +1/+1s. Tendo Ice Bridge. This is a funny one. So it enters with a charge counter on it, and you can proliferate those charge counters to basically make this like a command tower. Really, probably a little bit more tedious. Yeah, you're looking for, because who's proliferating charge counters on Nintendo Ice Bridge? But a fun use of the card, fun use of the ability. Warsaw Basilica, return land to your hand, add a Plains of Swamp. Now this guy, Glunch the Bestower, I like this guy a lot. He's a jellyfish. At the beginning of your end step, you choose a player. They put 2+1/+1 counters on a creature they control. Choose a second player, draw a card. Then choose a third player to create 2 treasure tokens. So a little bit of this like group hug idea going on. It's pretty fun. Kyler, Sigardian Emissary. Whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Kyler, Sigardian Emissary. And other humans you control get +1/+1 counter for each counter on Kyler. So if you got a couple humans, just keep buffing him up, and you're buffing up all your humans. Which is pretty cool. Liesa, Forgotten Archangel, excuse me. Flying lifelink. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, return that card to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. So, more of this exile thing going on. Again, doesn't super fit. I think this is a leftover card from the Ketchamos deck I put together for a week. Very similar to the Kayas. They were also exile planeswalkers. So one day this card will be replaced, but I love the art on it too much. Golden Sunmare, Ward 2/5/5, saddle 4. Whenever this creature attacks while saddled, search your library for a non-land permanent card with mana value 3 or less. Put it on the battlefield, then shuffle. So he's a fun one to just get a bunch of like Luminarch Aspirant, Magistrate Scepter. Like you can just get some cheaper guys out for free. Speaking of Magistrate Scepter, artifact, pay 4 and put a charge counter on him, and then remove 3 charge counters from the scepter and take an extra turn. So as long as you either A, have the mana, you can add a charge counter, proliferate it, turn 1. Next turn, proliferate it, tap and remove 3 charge counters and take a turn. If you only want to pay 1 instance of the 4 mana, you just keep proliferating it until you get to 4, remove 3, take an extra turn, proliferate it until you get to 4, remove 3. But it's really up to you. Taking an extra turn at all for 3 mana to cast and 4 mana for a charge mana. For 7 mana, taking an extra turn is crazy. Every 2 turns. Requisition Raid. This one's fun. It's got Spree, so you can pay to destroy an artifact, destroy an enchantment, or put a +1/+1 counter on each creature target player controls. So you can destroy your artifact, destroy your enchantment, and put a +1/+1 counter on all my creatures for 4 mana. Super cheap. Snapping Voidcraw. This is my little personal favorite. I will run him in every deck that I can because he costs 3 and you can tap him for 2. And if you don't want to tap him for 2, you have extra mana, you can draw a card. Boom. Fun little guy. Path of Ancestry. Add a mana of any color in your commander's color identity. If it's a spell that shares a color, or excuse me, if it's a creature that shares a color, scry 1. I was about to say, if it's a spell, that's like your whole deck. Manor Gate. Pick a color and then do green in that other color. Pretty cool. Terramorphic Expanse. Sack and look for a land. Arcane Signet. Pay 2. Tap for any color. Catilda, Dawnheart Prime. 1/1 with protection from werewolves. Human creatures you control have tap, add 1 mana of any of this creature colors. And then you can pay for 6 and put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So, good little bit of ramp, and you can put +1/+1 on everything. It's pretty fun. Pretty cool little human ramp. Thing in the Ice. I pulled this from an Innistrad pack. Thought it was funny. It enters with 4 ice counters on it. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, remove an ice counter. Then, if it has no ice counters on it, transform it. And by transforming it, we turn it into the Awoken Horror. Whenever this creature transforms into Awoken Horror, return all non-horror creatures to their owner's hands. And I own 2 horrors, this one and Atraxa. So I can return, all of your creatures to your hands and then have my buffed up commander and a 7/8 on the field. Just kind of fun. Mindstone. Classic. Pay 2. Tap to add a colorless. Or draw a card. Second, draw a card. This is an interesting one. I don't see a lot of people talk about this card. Maybe I'm just not in the right circle. A fortification, you can fortify a land, pay for 3, fortify for 3. And then whenever that land is tapped for mana, you can put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. If that creature shares a color with the mana that land produced, create a junk token. So you can just constantly pump out +1/+1 counters and junk tokens. Charitable Levy is fun. Non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast. Whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, put a collection counter on Levy. Then, if there are 3 or more collection counters on it, sack it. If you do, draw a card. Then you may search your library for planes, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So it's kind of annoying for a couple turns. It costs 1 more to cast for your non-creature spells. And then I could draw a card and a planes for 2 mana. And a card wastes. Classic. Ever-Flowing Chalice. This one's fun because normally you have to kick it and then tap it for however many charge counters you put on it by kicking it, but you can proliferate charge counters. So I've tapped this. I've paid like 4 to kick it twice, and by the end of the game I'm tapping it for 7 mana. Lux Artillery is funny. Whenever you cast an artifact creature spell, it gains Sunburst. Whatever, we don't really care about Sunburst. At the beginning of your end step, if there are 30 or more counters among artifacts and creatures you control, Lux Artillery deals 10 damage to each opponent. So as you can imagine, with our lands, creatures, artifacts, enchantments,